Hello and welcome everybody to this evening's webinar. My name's Cameron Chrysoglis, and I'm excited to share with you some of the insights that Liz Fusco and her team have been working very diligently on a lot of the protocols and information that we'll talk about tonight. But before we get underway, just a couple of things. Many of you I know are familiar with Zoom, and we all appreciate the time that you've spent registering and sharing with us some of your questions. We've had a really great reaction to registration, and just to give you a little insight, we've got people from all corners of the country, as you can see, 29 states represented. California and Florida and New York are the top couple of states represented, at least through registration. And we have a majority of you have some involvement with high school rowing, but we also are aware that there's some masters and some collegiate involvement as well. A very interesting cross-section of both rowers, coaches and parents on the line this evening. And some of you are calling in addition to those that are able to see the slides via computer. One just thing for you to all be aware of, that there is a question and answer function, and you can type your questions in at any time. We will do our best to answer those questions live here during the webinar. But if we're unable to address them directly, we will follow up with you after the call, so that we'll do our very best to answer as many of the questions that you have. One thing that we do want to mention is that there are a lot of questions about lightweight rowing, and one of the things that Liz is going to focus on tonight is optimizing health and performance of junior lightweight rowers. I know that one of the things that Liz and I were talking about before the call was just a little bit more of a focus on nutrition, because that obviously is Liz's expertise and an important part of this discussion. Want to welcome all of you to the call. And as I mentioned, if you have questions at any time, please feel free to type those into the Q&A window there. Liz and I have done a bunch of these now over the last sort of year and a half or 2 years. And Liz, it's always good to see you, and hope that we can answer as many, if not all, of your questions on this topic of optimizing health and performance for junior lightweight rowers. So Liz, I'll hand it over to you as I load up your slides.
Great, thanks. And thanks to everyone who's online and calling in for participating. I look forward to answering a lot of your questions today. So tonight's presentation is going to be about the health and performance of junior lightweights. And I just want to really specify one thing. For those of you who are not junior lightweights on the call, the scientific basis that I'm going to kind of discuss in some of the later slides applies to all athletes, not just lightweights, not just junior lightweights. But what we really wanted this presentation to be about was to provide you with some background and rationale behind some of the decisions that have been made about collecting data in some of the junior lightweight rowers. So without further ado, when we talk about nutrition for junior lightweights, I think it's really important to remember that these are growing athletes. So they don't have just the energy and macronutrient and micronutrient demands of a general athlete. They're also a growing body. So it's exceptionally important for them to understand what their nutrition needs are. Obviously, overall health is really important for this population. Performance is obviously something to consider as well, and preventing injury in younger athletes. And all of that growing, being healthy, healing quickly, performing well, reducing the incidence of injuries, all of that kind of swirls around this concept called energy availability. So energy availability is defined basically as consuming energy or having enough energy available to sustain the demands of training. So that means in a general endurance training program, you will have intensified periods of training where training volume is higher. where your reliance on carbohydrate is greater. And then you'll have periods of training where it's more rest, low intensity, lower volume, where your reliance on carbohydrates is reduced. So the concept of periodized nutrition is kind of understanding what nutrients to consume more of when you're training harder, and what nutrients to focus on when you're not training as hard. What habits do you need to kind of continue regardless of how hard you're training? And that kind of gets into all of these things. So protein, again, we have a number of webinars on kind of all of these things. I would recommend going through the 5 R's of recovery presentation if you want to learn a little bit more about all these things. But protein is obviously important for repairing and building new muscle tissue, but it also has an important impact on appetite and appetite regulation. Carbohydrates are an extremely important fuel source for endurance athletes. And again, this is the thing that kind of undulates the most when you're training harder versus not training quite as hard. It's carbohydrates. Fats are important for reducing inflammation from training, helping us to meet our calorie needs. They're an important component of different cell structures. Fluids are important for absorbing micronutrients, helping us thermoregulate, maintaining our hydration status, which can help regulate heart rates, how hard we feel like we're working in training. And micronutrients have a whole host of different effects. Some of the most relevant ones in endurance exercise being iron, which helps carry oxygen and helps with oxygenation and delivery of oxygen to working tissues, and vitamin D, which is involved in kind of bone metabolism and even muscle function. So again, I know that was kind of a quick run through what all these different nutrients and micronutrients do, but if you check out some of our previous webinars, you can kind of dive into all of that. So periodized nutrition. For those of you that are on the call, if you just simply go to teamusa.org/nutrition, you'll be able to access what we're looking at here. This is kind of the idea of periodizing nutrition. So I think one of the things that you might notice, the viewers that are on their computers right off the bat, is that protein needs don't really change when training volume changes. It stays fairly consistent. What really increases when we're training longer and harder is carbohydrate. So on an easy training day, be it maybe one aerobic session or an off day or rest day, maybe it's just a weights day, that would qualify for our easy training athlete plate. The moderate training plate, maybe it's 2 sessions in the day. One of them is endurance focused and one is skills focused. And then the hard training plate would be for days where there are longer than 3 hours of exercise over the course of the day, continuous exercise, or if it's an especially intensified period of training, maybe block of training. So this is the thing that I find that athletes of all ages struggle with, is the understanding that carbohydrates are essential, and it's really critical to be increasing them to meet the calorie expenditure that we are putting out when we're exercising. That extra energy that we expend doesn't need to be put back in the form of protein. It's really carbohydrate that we expend the most.
Liz, one of the questions that have just come in, which I think is an interesting one as it relates to what you're just mentioning in terms of carbohydrates, is with athletes that have either requirements or things that they can't eat, or that they are vegetarians or vegans. How do you recommend athletes and coaches making really good decisions about what they can and can't eat, whether it's through availability or just decisions about what they think is the best thing for them?
Yeah, and I think that any good nutrition plan is actually kind of a combination of those things. If you look at these individual athlete plates, again, you can just click through to teamusa.org/nutrition. There's a lot of things that fit within each of those categories on the plate. When we're talking about carbohydrates, pastas, rices, potatoes, cereals, breads, legumes, even the pickiest of eaters can typically find some things to fill up a portion of their plate. I also had a question from an attendee who asked about cost-effective methods of doing this. And I think a great way, if you're on a budget, to get enough veggies in to fill in their portion on the plate would be to choose frozen vegetables. Frozen vegetables are actually picked at their peak ripeness. So they have a very high micronutrient content because they're typically frozen right on the spot, or flash boiled and then frozen, flash steamed and frozen. Frozen veggies are a really cost-effective way to increase the micronutrient quality on your plate. And then for those of you that are vegetarian and vegan, right on. But there's plenty of plant-based options that serve as an excellent protein source. Specifically, soy-based foods are high in the amino acids that we see in similar amounts in animal foods. So tofu, tempeh, soy milks, edamames, those are all great things to fill up the protein side of the equation. And the USOPC actually should be coming out with a vegetarian version of our athlete plate within the next year or so. So now that we kind of understand that protein's kind of like the base, you know, it doesn't really shift very much when training's changing, getting more intense. We now understand that carbohydrate needs can greatly increase when we're training harder and longer. Now we kind of get into this paradigm of low energy availability. It's also known as relative energy deficiency in sport. And this specifically pertains to lightweights. So the definition, or actually before I get to the definition, I wanted to provide you with the reference. This is an open access article. This is actually co-authored by Dr. Kate Ackerman, who's a member of our medical committee. And this is the paper that I'm using to kind of guide my recommendations on relative energy deficiency in sport. The definition of which I believe is on the next slide. Here it is. It refers to impaired physiological functioning caused by relative energy deficiency. And this includes, but is not limited to, metabolism issues, menstrual function, bone health, immunity, protein synthesis, and cardiovascular health. So relative energy deficiency in sport, you can almost think of it as, you know, needing to fill up your gas before going on a long drive. If you're consistently starting really long drives with less than a quarter of a tank of gas, over an extended period of time, this is going to manifest in a lot of different symptoms, some of which I'll describe in the following slides. It really is a mismatch of energy intake versus energy expenditure. So in lightweight specifically, this can be either intentional. Maybe you're trying to come down to a certain weight or to make weight. So you are intentionally restricting and ignoring feelings of hunger. It can also be completely unintentional. And this is kind of where the athlete plates come into play. A lot of athletes just don't understand that when they are working harder and more intensely, they need more carbohydrate. So they could be just eating, like what I typically see is athletes eating the same amount of the same things day in and day out, and they're just not making the connection that they need to kind of consciously increase around workouts. Some of these reasons, they can either be a psychological reason, maybe it's a body image issue, a desire to lose weight to fit a certain expectation of oneself. It can be a physiological issue, potentially, you know, maybe this athlete's doing a training program that is really intense, and they also, you know, maybe they have a really intense course load and they're studying a lot, and they are commuting, getting picked up after school, going straight to practice. So it's hard for them to find times where they can eat. And then it can be kind of behavioral and situational, again, busy schedule, or, you know, especially in the junior lightweight population, standardized meal times. You know, one of the things that I hear a lot when I'm working with junior rowing programs is that they can't have a snack between breakfast and lunch because they're not allowed to eat in class. So sometimes it's tricky because of the functional challenges. But when an athlete, regardless of the reason that they are not consuming enough to meet their training demands, when they have low energy availability, they just don't have enough calories to support their training. When that goes unchecked for long enough, an extended enough period of time, it can develop into RED-S, or relative energy deficiency.
There's a couple of questions on this topic of total calories, and it's around this idea of how do you know when you're getting enough, and how do you know when you're getting the right balance if you are getting the total right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is a really great question, and I'm sure what people want to hear is eat X number of calories per day and eat them at these times and this many ounces and this many cups. And unfortunately, that's actually a pretty unscientific way to go about it. Any methodologies for collecting energy expenditure data are going to be inherently flawed and slightly inaccurate. Anyone who's on this call who's ever used something like, I'm not going to name any specific brands, but an app, a weight loss app or a weight tracking app that involves entering in your what the foods you ate and what your goals are for weight loss. All of those things are inherently inaccurate. They could be plus or minus 40% in some of their estimations. Human error is another thing to consider. What we are entering into the app is not going to be completely accurate. I think all of that is just way too constricting, and it's not accurate enough to be worth investing the time and energy in 98% of people. What we really need to do is shift more towards gaining the knowledge to be able to make decisions about what foods to choose around training, and being able to trust yourselves as athletes. And like one of the questions that always pops up is, what foods should I eat before a 2K? A 2K is not very long. You don't need to specifically fuel with like certain foods in perfect amounts right before that 2K. The most important thing is that you're not doing anything new, that the things that you decide to eat in the hour or so before that are simple, easy to digest, things that sit in your stomach really well. Things that you have 3 or 4 hours before that, that's going to be kind of your main meal. So understanding how to build that athlete plate based off of what you've been doing for training and what you're about to do is way more important than being given a bite plan. So we're in kind of the, how do you know whether you've had enough food? If you eat a meal and you're hungry within an hour, you didn't eat enough food. If you are waking up in the middle of the night hungry, you didn't eat enough food. If you have dinner and then have dessert and then still want more food, you probably didn't eat enough food over the course of the whole day. Same thing goes for waking up in the middle of the night hungry. So I think that as a populace, we're pulling away from the idea of eating intuitively based on how we feel and trusting kind of our own feelings of hunger and fullness. And we're kind of leaning into, I just want to plan. I want a meal plan. I want to be told what to do. And I don't know that that's necessarily the move. I think that we can rely on our internal kind of cues more than we think we can, even in a weight sensitive sport.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the biggest reaction I think to that is that most people just are struggling with time. They're sort of grabbing food in between activities, whether it's from training to training, which is the one area that everybody wants to spend most of their time, but obviously school and other commitments around all of that. There's a question also just about supplements. What's your reaction, given the population here are junior lightweight rowers? What's your recommendation to sort of going outside the lines there of what most people would describe as a conventional, a traditional sort of diet or nutritional approach?
Yeah, I would say if the idea of periodized nutrition and intuitive eating is unfamiliar, that is going to do way more than any supplement would ever be able to provide. In general, supplements are never going to replace or be better than food. And if we're talking about ergogenic aids, things that have the potential to improve performance, again, none of them are going to have anywhere near the effect that proper nutrition and recovery and sleep and stress management and technique development, all of those things can have. So really understanding how to prioritize and when to prioritize. The role of a junior lightweight rower really should be just going out there, having fun, choosing things that are comfortable in your stomach to eat nutrition-wise, not feeling the stress of having to monitor weight on a day-to-day basis, and really kind of focusing on the basics. And to me, supplements are not the basics. There's obviously exceptions if there's clinical indications for an athlete to take a certain type of supplement. But by and large, the majority of junior lightweight rowers aren't getting the type of testing or even necessarily require the type of testing that would need to be done in order to determine that. So definitely food first. And you'd be surprised how much nutrition periodization can have an impact on your performance.
Great, thanks.
So we've talked about how, under consuming, no matter the reason, not eating enough to support training, can cause what's called relative energy deficiency in sport. And these are some of the health consequences. Now, I want the kind of audience here to think about how this might impact a growing teenager, somewhere in the age of, maybe 14 to 18 years old. Your immunological function can suffer. So you might see that person's getting sick more often. Menstrual function, the athlete can either have late arrival of menstrual function or sporadic or no menstrual function whatsoever. And one of the developments of relative energy deficiency was that, yes, in women, low energy intakes can manifest as a cessation of menstrual function, but this applies to men too. Bone health, endocrine function, your metabolic function, your blood, growth and development, I think is a really critical thing to kind of think about in this population. Your psychological health, heart health, gut health, GI health, how you, people that feel that they may have like food sensitivities or intolerances. It may just be that they're not eating enough or they're not eating often enough. So you can kind of see here that this really manifests in a lot of different ways. And then we get into some of the performance effects. And I think that these, in a team that is connected, as most rowing teams are, these are some of the things that you might see as maybe a coach decreasing in performance. Maybe the person's getting more injuries. They could have decreased responses to training, impaired judgment, coordination and concentration. Glucose, carbohydrate, is the primary fuel source for the brain as well. So when an athlete's under fueling, they're typically more irritable, more moody. They have more trouble concentrating. Maybe some of those fine-tuned motor movements in the boat are a little bit more of a struggle. And again, this can be intentional or unintentional. Some of their stored energy can be low, decreasing in muscle strength because of a calorie deficit. So all of these things can negatively impact performance. And I think that, in an anecdotal note, some of these things I'm sure we've all seen as athletes are trying to, quote unquote, make weight. Just something to keep in mind, some of the performance implications of all of this. So now we get into kind of some of the more challenging aspects of this. We understand that sports nutrition for endurance athletes that are trying to make weight is a bit complicated. We understand that the risks associated with undereating and underconsumption of nutrients are vast. But how do we actually do something about it? What do we do to, collect information? So, some programs are more stringent than others, but I will go through some of the IOC's recommendations here. It is a challenging thing to diagnose when someone has relative energy deficiency. Early detection, though, is critical to prevent some of the long-term health consequences of disordered eating, undereating, etc. And this is the International Olympic Committee's recommendations that screening should be undertaken as part of an annual health exam when an athlete presents with any types of disordered eating, weight loss, lack of normal growth and development, menstrual dysfunction, injuries, decreased performance, or mood changes. So all reasons for an athlete to see a multidisciplinary team to be screened. These are some of the things that you might look for: a history of stress fractures, a history of iron deficiency, some of the things that can be seen from teammates, parents, coaches, athletes: irritability, fatigue, aversion, obsession with a few healthy foods, moments of binging followed by excessive exercise. These are all kind of red flags, as we would say. So the type of testing that we would typically do includes a blood panel that includes a full iron panel, and then a x-ray that looks at the density of bone. That's another thing that we tend to see when athletes aren't consuming quite enough energy, because calcium is responsible for the heart contracting, for muscles contracting. It's pretty tightly regulated in the bloodstream. So we can't really use blood testing to assess what's happening in the bone. But because blood levels of calcium are so tightly regulated, that means that it's getting pulled out of bone when the athlete's not consuming enough calcium. So we can actually see a decrease in the density of bone by using this machine. And that's something that we like to track over time to really see how someone's bone is adapting or reacting to training and nutrition. So this is basically a risk assessment that was developed. So I won't mention too much about this, but for those of you on the phone, this is kind of looking at ways to assess the risk for sport participation in athletes that are under consuming nutrients. So low risk would be healthy eating habits, normal hormonal and metabolic function, healthy bone density, and healthy muscle system. Moderate risk would be prolonged abnormally low percent body fat, substantial weight loss, attenuation of the expected growth and development. And I think that that's kind of an important thing to note as we start to kind of segue into talking about junior lightweights. Abnormal menstrual cycles, abnormal hormone profiles in men. So there's a lot of kind of things that might put you into the moderate risk. And then high risk would be some really serious conditions that warrant inpatient therapy. So now that we've we've gone through all of these things, you kind of hopefully now understand what some of the risks of chronic undereating can be for athletes, for growing adolescents. So now I want to just talk a little bit about the rationale for the U.S. Rowing Junior Lightweight Protocol. We really felt that rowing as a junior lightweight in the U.S. shouldn't be something that is a decision that's made by the athlete, by a coach, by their parents. It really should be something that it's a category that the athlete naturally falls into. Because of all the risks that are associated with weight loss in the general population, but especially in adolescents who are growing and adapting. So we wanted to create something that was simple. We didn't want something that would be a high cost burden to members of US rowing, or that would take a lot of time, because we know that people we're already quite busy. So we wanted to create a simple, minimally invasive system that would allow us to monitor the growth and the weight trajectory of junior lightweight athletes nationwide. And I think that the important word there is actually the term monitor. We're not making any rash decisions on their growth and weight trajectory. We want to be able to monitor them. We also wanted to introduce the requirement of having medical approval for junior lightweights at their annual physical exam. The rationale behind this was really to provide the athlete with an additional set of professional eyes. Maybe it's a physician that has known this athlete for a good portion of their life. To have a medical professional assess someone and say, yes, this person is healthy at this weight at this time. Holds a lot of weight, pun intended. So we wanted to this is really the most critical, is that we want to discourage active weight loss attempts in adolescents. Adolescents are minors, and they shouldn't be kind of categorized as you will be losing weight, you will not. We want to prevent dangerous acute weight making attempts by adolescents, by minors at US rowing sanctioned regattas. This is a great risk to our organization, and we want to encourage healthy behaviors around racing. And then to identify any athletes who are at risk of long-term health consequences, and to also provide athletes and staff and parents with the knowledge that they might need just to find a good resource for these athletes if they do need help. So we thought about a lot of different options when we were looking at different ways to kind of monitor the weight and growth trajectories of junior lightweights. And we landed upon the CDC Growth Charts. The reason why we chose these is because nationwide, they are used to monitor the growth of children aged 2 years and above, whereas the World Health Organization growth charts are 2 years and younger. It's important to note that the CDC growth charts are not intended to be used as a diagnostic measurement. It is a tool that helps to kind of form a clinical impression. Is this child growing normally? Are they at a body weight that's natural for them and doesn't require dieting or calorie restriction or low energy intakes? Are there any other red flags that might warrant additional investigation or referral to an interdisciplinary care team? Is the athlete isolating themselves from others, avoiding social gatherings? Have they been, having more mood disturbances lately? These are all kind of things to kind of consider during this. So here they are. This is what the growth charts look like. Essentially they are kind of standardized to boys and girls. This is based on a wealth of data from the CDC. And you'll see the kind of dark black line down the middle. That would be if we were kind of to split the population basically in half. That's where everybody would kind of sit. And then the lines on the upper and lower hinge here are kind of telling us, is this person outside of the normal for their weight or for their height? So Cam, you can click through to the next slide as well. That's kind of what these ones look like as well. And these are based off of, again, decades of data on growth and height trajectories for both boys and girls. So I wanted to go through with a couple of case studies just to kind of reiterate, what things we might be looking at and what we might be tracking. So this first case study is a 18-year-old male. He's 5'11", 152 pounds. He's grown 6 inches in the past year, 7 inches since 2018. So we've got some of his data here. We can see that he is getting significantly taller. His weight is staying fairly the same. But because of the fact that he is 152 pounds, he will be moved to an open weight class. I think as a clinician, looking at this data, one of the things that we would notice would be that he has dropped 10% in his weight for age over the past 2 years. And with a huge increase in growth or in height for age, we have a decrease in weight for age. So it just doesn't seem like this is lining up very well. Again, the deciding factor here would be that the athlete is above weight for lightweight classification, so he would be moved to open weight. And then we have case study number 2. So this is an 18-year-old female. She is 5'7", 130 pounds. She has grown an inch since 2018. You can see in this growth data here that the athlete is growing in height and growing in weight. They are at weight at the time of their physical. They qualify for junior lightweight rowing. So this is really quite simple. And I want to reiterate the fact that this growth chart data isn't at this point in time being collected to say you can't be a lightweight. What we're trying to do is understand this population better and to strongly promote the concept that junior lightweights should never be manipulating their body weight in order to make weight. So this person qualifies. So in conclusion, junior lightweight rowing has some inherent risks due to the inclusion of weight cutoffs. It is the position of U.S. rowing that junior lightweights should not attempt to lose weight in order to qualify for their category due to the potential long-term health consequences. Parents, coaches, staff, and athletes should all be aware of the signs and symptoms of disordered eating, low energy availability, and relative energy deficiency in sport. Parents, coaches, and staff should also know how to direct athletes to the appropriate resources for evaluation and treatment if concerns about their health and well-being arise. And under no circumstances should a junior athlete be instructed to make weight. Such behavior actually qualifies as a safe sport violation. So I wanted to show you just one more slide here, how to direct athletes to appropriate resources for disordered eating or sports-related dietetics questions. There's 3 organizations that can help you to find a qualified professional in your area or at your university. The CPSDA works specifically with different university sports and professional teams. And then the Sports Cardiovascular and Wellness Nutrition, they actually have a search engine where you can search for a qualified dietitian in your geographic area. And then the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is also a great resource to try to find help in this area. So again, at the end of the day, the purpose of this project the purpose of this pilot initiative is to collect information, help understand this population better, and to help them understand the risks that are associated with any attempts at acute weight making or genuine weight loss in a growing population. At the end of the day, it's just the health of the athlete. That's our biggest concern here at US Rowing. And I hope to make some more webinars to help kind of address some of the more nutrition specific questions as it relates to lightweights. But you can also search, I recorded a podcast fairly recently. If you Google search Leo training, and my name, Liz Fusco, I actually did a podcast with Joe DeLeo, and it was actually on lightweight rowing. So that's accessible through his website also, Leo Training.
Very good, Liz. A lot of really good information here, and I think for the benefit of those that feel perhaps a little bit overwhelmed, we'll certainly be archiving this, and there's a lot of really good resources that are already available. These slides are available on the US Rowing website. One question that's come up a couple of times, Liz, just in terms of athlete wellness and weight management. How do you respond to the question of supporting athletes who maybe are a little bit light in weight and want to get stronger? We've talked a lot of the focus is actually on athletes trying to go down in weight, but what about for those athletes that just want to be stronger and are just trying to find the right ways to, as you say, I think in really simple terms, make good decisions, use food in a wise way, and learn to enjoy the sport regardless of what their weight is. But how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think like one of the kind of primary questions with an athlete trying to increase their body weight is, are you accurately tracking your body weight? So one of the things that I like to recommend is that rather than athletes weighing themselves every day or at sporadic times of day, maybe they just weigh themselves 1 day a week, maybe 2 days a week. You should be weighing yourself first thing in the morning, after using the bathroom, before having anything to eat. That kind of ensures that there's less variability in that measure. And the goal really when it comes to weight gain is to have a modest surplus of calories. So you're consuming a little bit more than you require. And you can achieve that in a couple of different ways. It could either be through consciously consuming slightly more each time you eat, if you're already eating, every 3 to 4 hours of the day. Or if you're not eating that often, then perhaps there's a time of day when you can incorporate a high calorie kind of complete snack that has proteins and carbohydrates and fats. Maybe there are 1 or 2 times of day when you can add a snack to help you to increase your muscle mass. And the goal really when it comes to gaining weight is that the rate of weight gain is somewhere around a half pound to a pound a week. So that's only 2 to 4 pounds a month. So having that kind of accurate tracking of body weight can help you to understand if your weight is actually increasing. And rather than having to count calories, just accurately assessing weight changes and consciously increasing your intake, either at each time you eat or at certain snacks. And then again, that alone, just talking about weight gain, that could be a 1 hour webinar. So maybe we should consider that as the next one.
Well, I think you're onto something there, Liz. And maybe as a final run out the door, there've been a bunch of questions again relating to that idea of people just don't have a lot of time. So can you give folks some parting suggestions with 1 minute left to run out? I know running out to the store in this current climate is not the way it has been, but snack ideas for folks when time is of the essence. What suggestions do you have that can whet the appetite and also fill the caloric intake for busy people that are training hard and have busy lives?
All right, I'm just gonna shoot off a bunch here. Protein bar, piece of fruit, tub of Greek yogurt with a handful of granola, drizzle of honey, and some peanut butter or nuts. A smoothie made with either milk or soy milk or protein powder, and some fresh fruit, frozen fruit, and maybe a little bit of peanut butter or almond butter. You could do 3 or 4 clementines and some beef jerky and a couple slices of string cheese. It could be a deli sandwich, like a turkey and cheese sandwich with some veggies. Maybe if you have a couple of hours before practice, maybe it's like a whole wheat bread. If you need to eat quick and get that energy fast before you get on the water, maybe it's white bread. You could do, how am I doing on time? You could do a 6-inch sub. It could be a pre-made protein shake. Some of the ones that they sell now are like fruit in a bottle with protein. You could do leftovers from the night before. Maybe it's a scoop of a grain, a little bit of a piece of protein, and some steamed vegetables.
Okay, I'm hungry now, so that's probably a good enough indication that a piece of fruit for those of us on the West Coast where it's a little bit too early, and for those of us on the East Coast who are about to probably get ready for bed, be smart. So, all right, Liz, well, we're going to wrap it up. That's right on time, right on task, and right on point. So, as always, thank you very much for your expertise. Just to wrap up, for those of you that haven't been with us before, there's a couple of things that we'll be sending out a survey just to wrap this up and to get your thoughts. I know there are a few questions that have not been addressed, so we'll be sure to get back to you on that. And if you do have additional questions or suggestions, please let us know. It sounds like, Liz, we might have to do one on snacks moving forward. So again, thank you everybody for your time. Thank you, Liz, for all of your expertise, and everybody have a great night.